Conversely, and this is where I move on, but the other way that they might look at it is that it has been a big help for them just draining the life out of a team by holding on to the ball for so long.
It's a big part of them, the pressure that they bring, and the tangible effect it had on the All Blacks. There are question marks over whether the All Blacks were tired. I know that's being put front, as it always is in a November loss. But
listen, this was not like we didn't catch them cold. They planned for this game. They wanted to win this game, and they were completely flat.
They were just found wanting.
That's a good way to pivot into the next kind of point that we're talking about, which is like the All Blacks in general. I mean, there are serious issues with this All Black team that simply weren't there 4 years ago, that have been exposed this year. And
I think but it's not just this year. We were questioning. Well, like, I think if we go back into the history, the annals of this podcast, but before the Lions tour, we were annoyed at the selection of Gatland to do it again initially, I think, and
correct.
Annoyed at the inclusion of Ben Teo at the expense of Gary Ringrose.
#Justice for Bod.
Yes. Well, that's way back into the annals of history, but like, just a few things that stood out to us as problems, and we were also just singing the All Blacks praises, saying, nah, look, if we're going down there to physically dominate them, we're going to be found absolutely wanting if we're picking a side to go and play Warren Ball plus Farrell, and it's like, no, that's not going to work. And then it was a bit like that was the team that pretty much went out in the first test, and that was pretty much what happened. But then what we saw from the All Blacks subsequently was obviously the second test. It was a crazy Sunnyvale play that seemed to kind of change the course of it, and even then with Sexton and Farrell, it still took a lot of effort to get that win. But the third test was remarkable, because the All Blacks just didn't look like themselves at all. It looked much more like a Northern Hemisphere game than a Southern Hemisphere one, and that seems to have marked a point in time when they've got a bit too good into their analysis. It feels like you've been making this point that as soon as they start doing homework on teams, and like it was often an adage where it's like, it is so much easier to beat the All Blacks when you have their respect. When they're giving you your propers and doing prep for it. It just seems to take some of their in the moment play away from them, and their heads up play away from them, which is what when they put 70 routinely on a team, which they invariably do. Like we saw England at the weekend struggling in the first half against Japan. That never happens with New Zealand. New Zealand never struggle with Japan, and they didn't the week before, because it's just they firmly believe they're better than them and they're going to beat them. And as well as doing their propers as far as speaking in a respectful manner within the media and being a proper, lovely representative of the sport, which they are as an institution, once they the notion of them taking a 2-week training camp out of Super Rugby to prep for the England and the Ireland game, and then just the way they came out to play both of those games, like crazy. Watching them play in Twickenham, granted in the rain, but Beauden Barrett kicking it. And then there was a very telling interview with Barrett where he was during the week, where he was talking about how it's always challenging for a Kiwi fly half to come up to the Northern Hemisphere and have to change or play a different style of rugby. And it's like, that's something you'd never hear from an All Black player ever. It's like, you don't change the style of rugby. We play All Black rugby and you lose. That's what I associate with the All Blacks anyway, speaking as an Irishman who's been whooped by them constantly. And it's like, no, there's no hint of them changing their style of play to accommodate you.
Well, they're going to beat you. Certainly not Ireland. I mean, they have had their bugbears in the past with the English, precisely because of that reason. Ireland were never included in the club of teams they took seriously until just now. But certainly now that they are, I mean, they won that game way easier than perhaps you ever would have thought possible. Looking back in the day, I mean, some of those great Eddie O'Sullivan teams with O'Driscoll tries, and they really did try, but the All Blacks outplayed them. And that's what you look for from the All Blacks. There was a summer tour a few years back that England were playing the All Blacks in, and it was 15-all, I think was the score. A tie game, no tries in the game, and it was about 78 minutes. And I remember I was watching it with Dad, our father, and it was in the morning. You know him well. And I was saying that for the camera. But it was about 78 minutes into the game, and the All Blacks got a penalty on the English 10, just out to the right hand side, basically out in front. A very makeable kick that probably would have won them the game. And Aaron Smith, little go-getter that he is, tapped and went. And Dad was like, what the win the game is there to be won, and he was going, what are you doing, you bad England are going to go get a result over there because you're an idiot. And they tapped and went. They put together, this was I think back in 2013 or something like that, they put together some extraordinary play and ended up getting a try on the right hand side. I think it would have been Corey Jane or Israel Daragh or someone like that got the try in the corner, and they won the game 20 points to 15. And like they were saying at the end, they were kind of laughing about it, like, we hadn't scored a try in the game, and we just felt that we wanted to score a try in the game. And then they went and did it. Yeah. And like it was that set of balls in them to do that. I think the Lions tour was a bit of a seminal moment for me. Like if you look at the way I've been viewing the All Blacks pre-Lions tour, they were basically just invincible. They were just this tier above with this conveyor belt of players, this awesome mentality, this conveyor belt of coaches. Just the rugby intellect of this country is off the scale. They know what they're doing. They are all about, and they've boiled it down to, it's about tries. We outscore you with tries. That's how we play you, and you're just not.
Space and speed equals tries. Tries equal more points than any of your silly 3-pointers could ever amount to.
No issue.
So no issue. Yeah.
And what they did, that quote that I drew earlier in the podcast about Steve Hansen saying, you're going to be afraid to come to us and take us on up front. That was something that he said after the first test. And the first test, they completely caught the Lions cold by basically changing up the way they played. They had done their homework on the Lions. They saw some weaknesses in the tight, and they ran with it. And even though they scored a bunch of tries, basically everything that they did in that game was almost inside 10. They were just steamrolling them, especially in the early parts of that game. They were steamrolling them through the middle, getting good offloads away then, and then putting them away. But they did it physically. They outmuscled them. And I think that was a proud moment for Steve Hansen. I think he loved it. I think he loved doing that to the Lions. And I think he needs to get off that train because every time he's played a Northern Hemisphere team since, or England and Ireland specifically, he has tried to do this thing of beating them at their own game. And he's leaned on Beaudie, and he's leaned on Sam Whitelock big time. And now a few times now, the last Lions tour that you saw the next week, as much as you can say the next week it was about Sonny Bill, the same problems were there. They didn't score a try in that game. The Lions scored 2. That's
very un-All Blacks,
and that's why they lost that game and hence didn't win the series. And again in the final game, as you say, they didn't look themselves. They were going for that. So basically that whole tour, I think they did change up the way they play, or that whole test series. And then usually in the Rugby Championship they're comfortable, they get back to being who they were. The only real time I've seen them struggle being themselves was this year in Wellington, when they were throwing loose passes in the box, who are this whole other entity of classness that we're going to get into. We're doing a great job on defense, just pressuring the outside and forcing those loose passes, and then punishing them for it.
Indeed. And a few defensive tries.
They did. And that was great as well. And now since then, the All Blacks have narrowed up again. They did do that prep for these matches, and they definitely planned on thinking, like, you nullify the Irish if you beat them up front. They have nothing if you beat them up front. But how the hell? Why are you trying to beat them up front? Like, that's
get around.
He's like, I'm sure you would nullify us if you beat us up front, but good luck. You're coming to Dublin. Like, we care about this game here. You're up against, like, you're not dealing with mugs here. Joe Schmidt and the boys, like, they're thinking, and they're going to have them firing. You'd want to be doing some kind of performance.
Like, as far as you're playing the homework game and you're playing the kick from hand game, it's like, it's a bit crazy because Bowden's got some techers, but his kicking from hand and his game control, like, he's not going to become Sexton or even Richie Mo'unga, who's actually, I think, a better player of that kind of game if you want to play that kind of game, but they shouldn't because it's not their game. But also, as far as homework's concerned, like, you can do all the homework you like, you're not going to match Joe Schmidt's Ireland for the amount of tape that they consume and the amount that they've seen. Because it's like,
as soon as you start playing that game, you become just another test side. You become ordinary. Everybody's doing that. Like, you're playing catch up in that regard. And look,
it feels that way.
It's not like it's unimportant to do homework, etc., but what you have is that blistering turnover ability and that ability to find tries.
It's the where space there's a try thing. It's what we were so complimentary about the likes of Fiji and Tonga and as well, where you're looking at them play the game and it's like, sure, you may be 40 points down and you may have lost every set piece and everything's a calamity and all this, and it's 70 minutes gone, but their space, there's try. And it's like, and they still have that attitude. It's next play, where's the space? And like, that was always like shown in excellent fashion by New Zealand as well, where they did have the set piece to match. They did have good strong defence, good strong maul defence to match. Obviously the pack, like this is where like Hansen's point was salient about like you shouldn't come here trying to run over us because we're no mugs in the physical game either. But it wasn't the emphasis of their game. That's where a lot
was in that game.
But that's where a lot of Northern Hemisphere teams had gone awry before. When Wales come down and think maybe we might edge them physically, and then they're thinking like, no, you won't, and we'll run around you. And that's what ended up happening. But like they seem to have shifted away from that. More specifically in these big games, like they're still capable of doing it. And anytime they just kind of believe themselves on another level to their opposition, they duly do play that game and look very impressive. Historically, all the Australia tests this year for reference.
Indeed, and historically speaking, and in the history of the professional game, and I'm going to include 2011 in this as well. The All Blacks have looked at their worst when the weight of the world has been on their shoulders. And you saw it in 99, you saw it in 2003, you saw it in 2007, you saw it in that 2011 final. You saw it in the Tri-Nations in 2009 when the Box put the pressure on them and the number one spot was on the line, and they did crumble and they lost that game. And like that is a recurring theme that you thought might be put to bed by just how good that 2015 team were. And that 2015 team, I think, are the best team ever to play rugby, probably.
It's an argument, I think so.
And listen, they won the World Cup and now did it. What you're seeing now with this team is some of that old stuff creeping back. You know, they're very loose and they're very good at times, and Barrett gets his 4 tries, but then on the big moments there are crumplings. And if you look at like crumplings, I don't know what that is. They crumble a bit. I don't know. Crumplings. Little moments of crumbling.
Cracks.
Hey, there you go. There you go. But there are those
shades of fallibility.
Shades of fallibility. That's a wonderfully articulate way to put the word crumpling.
Crumplings,
but
I'm inclined to agree. I firmly agree with that. They don't have the balance right. The back row is one issue we cited where I just think they're fundamentally inferior to that iteration.
There are a lot of areas,
but there are a lot of areas.
Like,
too,
I mean, even at 10, as good as Barrett is, Dan Carter was like a fine wine in that World Cup, and then you had a Barrett off the bench.
Yes,
but even in the centre. Like, as much as we talked
also
about...
Also crude.
Even in the centre, you talked about like the difference between that 2013 clip and that this year, the last week 2018 clip of them attacking us in the last play. One of the big difference makers for them was Man Onu. And as good as Crotty is, and Crotty did end up getting the try in that game, Man Onu was a phenomenal marvel.
Well, sure, in that World Cup, like, Sonny Bill wasn't getting into the team because it was Nonu and Smith originally, and then
in the final Sonny Bill was at 12 and Nonu was at 13.
Yes, that's where it came out in the final, and they linked beautifully. But Sonny Bill wasn't starting most of those games in that run to the World Cup. Like, that's how good that team were and how set they were. Like, they haven't answered those questions in the centres. Goodhue is a fine player. He's not a reader of the game at the same level as Conrad Smith, and he's not a game busting man on either.
I mean, the big issue that you have to look at then as well, like that you pointed out, is the back row, and like just like how good a player Richie McCaw was for starters, to not have come close to replacing him essentially. Like, there's flirting with Sam Cane, just as you say, ignoring Matt Todd, who was his understudy in the Crusaders, and then like for a team that is so good off turnover ball, to be lacking so fundamentally
such
for
a fundamental route to get
position
turnover
on the park that is basically designed around generating turnover ball.
That's the job.
That's a 7. Like, that's the base mark.
That's why I still don't understand. Like, Artie Sevilla is getting heaps of praise, and I think even looking at his performance by certain metrics, he's having a good game because he's making a lot of tackles.
He's a very good number 8.
He's a very good number 8. This is the point where it's like he's a great number 8.
Yeah.
Just not a 7. Like, that's not what a 7 is. And we were very critical, and like loads of Northern Hemisphere journalists love to jump on Eddie Jones during the Six Nations when he's talking about, you're talking about rugby 10 years ago, and you're talking about having an out and out open side, and you don't need one, and then suddenly Scotland are making mugs of you at every breakdown, and then maybe it's like, oh, maybe we do need a 7.
Drafted Sam Underhill.
Who's that boy who we sent away in exile to Swansea? Is it Sam Underhill? Yeah, get him in. And then it's like, oh, he's the saviour, and it's like, he's a fine player, but Ireland did a job on him in the Six Nations as well, because we have been creating 7s like that for years. As lovely as a player he is, he's not quite on that level. I think Matt Todd is on a level above Sam Underhill, if I'm honest. Like in the Crusaders, and I watch a lot of the Crusaders, Matt Todd does a lot of good work, a lot of really good work, and a lot of times what number 7s are there to do gets overlooked. It's not really something reflected in the stats. Things like slowing up ball doesn't get reflected, which even if you're not getting the turnover, that's another fundamental role that the 7 has to be performing that I don't think Ardi Sevilla brings them at all.
Yeah.
He just doesn't get...
He picks his moments,
He picks his moment, he gets 1 or 2 good steals, but he's not impactful in the breakdown in that way. Like when you look at the way Pocock just kind of haunts breakdowns, he's just ready to pounce, and you have to be aware
he doesn't even want to be the tackler. He flirts behind the tackler and wants to get in.
And it means that the multi-phase gets a little bit more static because of it, because you have to resource the ruck. Whereas against New Zealand, and Ireland took a few liberties at the weekend with that and got away with it because there's no specialist there to do it. Occasionally Goodhue will recognise that there's a chance on here and try and go for it, but he's not there to be doing that. There should be a player there like that in there. And it also, I think the net result, like Kieran Reid will get, like he didn't play well, and he's worthy of his bit of flack as well, but I think his role in this team is fundamentally different to his role in the previous team. If you're talking McCaw and Kino doing a lot of that physical work, and then Kieran Reid being the technical, glamorous player out in the wide, getting his hands free, getting those offloads going in the wide channels and setting up some beautiful tries. That's the Kieran Reid we all love, and now he's having to take on CJ Stander roles and stuff, and it just looks a bit of a mess.
It does. The whole team, to be honest with you, and like, listen, I don't want to levy too much criticism on Steve Hansen, who's a good bloke, and at the end of the day was the manager of that greatest team in the history of rugby, was the coach even of them, and but at the same time, the whole team does look like a mishmash at the moment. Just a mishmash of quality players doing different things in various combinations.
And Ben Smith on the wing.
Yeah.
What's that about? He's the best player on the team. He's probably the best player on all teams, because I can't cite a better player than him. Yeah. Because he's that clever, and yet he can't impact on the game from 14.
Well, he was frozen out of it at the weekend, and Damien McKenzie was everywhere, and I thought Damien McKenzie played well. I actually really liked Damien McKenzie. So do I. But like, Ben Smith is not moved to accommodate any man. No. And that's like, you could have McKenzie on the wing, you could have Ben Smith at centre or something.
This is what I've been proposing. Like, obviously Sonny Bill's out at the moment. Crotty Ben Smith as a centre partnership, I think that makes a lot of sense. Ben Smith reminds me a lot of Brian O'Driscoll in the way he plays anyway, even if he plays at fullback. I just think the way he reads the game offensively and defensively, it's just very smart, which is what, and his hands are great too, even though they slot him out on the wing. He's a good passer of a ball, totally. So he's understands rugby enough to be like, he's not dying with the ball, he's going to keep it alive and find space for other people. It also means you can free up one of those slots in the wing for Waisaki Naholo to come back into the team, who I think he should be in that team realistically.
In a Jacob Stockdale sort of way, where like he's just, you give him space,
he's gonna make something
also
happen.
Himself and Aaron Smith have this cool telepathy thing that'd be nice to see a bit more
exactly of. It's just more tools, and it's just using your weapons, because like Crotty and Goodhue as a centre pairing, like they're very fine players, but they're like, you're not looking at Nonu, Conrad Smith,
and you're not looking at those like in that last phase of play when you were looking to guys to make plays. Those guys didn't, and like, that's the thing about the Crusaders this year. I mean, that's what finished the game for them was the Crusaders 3/4 line, and like, listen, defensively very solid. They were bullying the whole of Super Rugby, but in terms of their actual broken field techers, they weren't the best team in New Zealand. They weren't. That wasn't how they scored tries, and they needed a bit of that against Ireland. They definitely needed a bit of that against that defence. They needed to see some offloading games. They were missed Sonny Bill, but also you would have loved to see, and again, like, he was just Ben Smith, the guy to bring it was just on the right hand side of the pitch. That's where he was, and that's where he stayed. And the game
couldn't impact on the game.
Game ended before they got it out to the right hand side.
Well, he nearly got that ball, but then Peter O'Mahony took it away from him.
You know what I mean? In that last attacking phase, like, they could have spun it out wide. They did get it to him once with a nice over,
and he
pass.
He looked instantly dangerous.
Their most dangerous moment. And then they went across, and before they got it back right, they had knocked it on. And like, listen, he was just out there when he should have been the man in there making the plays. So for sure, I agree with you. I think it's a good call. Yeah,
because he's always impressed me, Ben Smith. I don't understand. Sure, I believe that McKenzie is a fine player. I think there's possibly even argument for Ben Smith at fullback and then Mackenzie at 23. I like what Mackenzie offers from 23 as well.
Yeah.
I'm not forgetting him out of the team at all, because I think he's a phenomenal player.
And we love him. We used to have a great Damien McKenzie segment on the podcast.
Indeed, yeah.
He's a Chiefs man.
This is it, yeah. And James Lowe, who's now become a firm favourite of us as Leinster fans, but we were already loving it.
We already loved him.
Loved watching the Chiefs and D-Mac and Lowe tearing it up. So I'm a full fan of D-Mac in there. But I think there's just more balance to be done in there, and they don't know what they're doing with their centres. They got no inroads at the weekend, and it's like, we don't want to be it's very easy to be throwing stones even here for having just won it. But that's not what this is all about. It's like, I think they still have the ingredients to be a World Cup winning team.
Oh, I mean, listen, they're probably still favourites.
Yeah, but it's like I just see a lot more problems than I've ever really associated with the All Black team.
Considering that they're
comparing to the last
they're
team,
going to have to play South Africa.
Yeah,
and if they lose that game, which
they have to play Ireland,
they have to play Ireland.
Yeah,
so it's fraught with danger for them.
It is.
It really is the World Cup, and like, they're going to need some big performances early in that tournament, and it's like, Steve Hansen was thoroughly outcoached by Joe Schmidt at the weekend, and like, the point is being made all over the New Zealand media, what would Joe Schmidt's All Blacks look like? Would they be, there probably would be more structures, there would be a plan to every position, they would know what they're doing, they would have a plan B, they wouldn't be aimlessly kicking the ball away.
No.
And like, it's harsh because it's the only real down patch in Stephen Hansen's All Black tenure, and I still think he's a very smart guy, and he's talking about this new way, whatever the hell it is. I have my suspicions.
That was the quote that we wanted to lead this off with, actually, where he'd mentioned it in the post-match presser, where he was like, we're caught between the old way and the new way of playing, or we want to change our way of playing and we're caught between them, and when we get it right we'll see some improvements, was what he said, which was an interesting thing for a coach to say in that kind of arena post game like that. But
it was the old way was that all attacking flair that possibly cost them the game against South Africa, where they wouldn't even take a drop kick.
Yeah, well, now that's obviously wrong-headed.
Yeah, and then this new way is just the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yes, indeed. There's a balance to be struck somewhere,
for sure,
but I think it has to involve them playing the way they do, and this is where, like, them being empowered to play is so important, where they're not as structured as a Joe Schmidt team.
I agree.
They have shapes, but those shapes are designed to give these playmakers options to play the game
and just to read where the space is. Look up and see what the defense is doing, and then isolate where the space is. There's always space somewhere. It's a big pitch, and then try and execute plays to find it. And usually they do have the techers to do it. But in terms of the structure of the team, they need to think. They with any luck, the conveyor belt will turn up a tight head who can take them to the World Cup. Look at Dane Coles' quality, Cody Taylor's quality, the second rows are quality. They need to find a back row. They need to do that next year over Super Rugby, and then into June and the I'm not sure if there is a June series next year. There isn't. It's just a shortened rugby championship and some pre-World Cup playoffs. So it's over those games are going to be huge for them in terms of finding basically a back row and a centre partnership, and then deciding what they want to do with the game. And if they are going for Aaron Smith and Beauden Barrett, it can't be this new way of, like, if it's a new way, you may as well ditch Barrett or move him to fullback or whatever the hell, and
move him fullback and pick Moanga,
because Aaron Smith and Beaudie Barrett are far from the top end of Test rugby when it comes to the kicking, controlling, slow 10-man rugby game. That's not their game. No, that's more Sexton and Murray kind of play than Barrett and Smith, which we associate with 4 tries against Australia and all that kind of lovely stuff. They just seem to be caught in between themselves, and I definitely think there's something in that where as soon as they start analysing things too much, things like, oh, they have a rush defence, so we're going to kick behind them all day, and it's like, no, that's surely wrong. Like, there were one or two of them, like the TJ Perinara one at 77 minutes, that was the one that annoyed me the most, because they had a scrum advantage on their own. I think it was between their 10 metre and 10 metre and their 22 in the 5 metre line, and he just dinked it over aimlessly over the top to be snaffled up by Ireland, reset for a scrum in their tram lines in their own half, and that takes another minute and a half off the clock, and I'm just like, what are they doing? What are they doing? I don't know. It was, I don't know if they kicked a kick for 16-9 as well.
They did, which is
to make, like, going for the draw. As soon as they kicked, from our fans' perspective, as soon as they took that kick, we were like, oh, they're going for the draw. I'm starting to feel confident here.
That was literally that was the moment in the match when I suddenly stopped feeling quite the ball of nerves that I was. Even the Stockdale try, I still had that horrible feeling that it's like, oh, they're just going to go bang bang try because I've seen them do it many times before. But then kicking 3 from there was mental, because that was the one period of play where they were starting to get some dominance over us, and they were starting to find some space and some soft shoulders to win a few contacts, and it was just looking dangerous, and then they kicked 3 and it's like, it was crazy. By my estimation, it was a bit crazy.
Anyway, listen, learnings for Steve Hansen and the boys, and the All Blacks. You know, they have some work to do, because they got a hell of a tough World Cup draw. So it's gonna be it's gonna make for bloody interesting next year.
It surely is.